B'shus Rosh Yeshiva and Hola Oran Rabbanan Rabbi. The Rambam says that Chanukah is a time of simcha, but you don't find it mentioned anywhere in the Gemara. Gemara says in Shabbos, "My Chanukah, the Taner Rabbanan, on the 25th of Kislev, there were 8 days. Yimei Chanukah Tamna. There's no hesped, no tinus. Why? Shekashenichnusu Yevonim lehechol. They're matama everything except for one pach shem, and we all know the Gemara, Nas and Nesh and Kaveh, Yontif and Halo and Haidah, but there's no mention of simcha. And furthermore, you take a look at the Gemara, and it seems to be a pella. The Gemara says, "My Chanukah, the Taner Rabbanan, Chav Hei B'Kislev is Yemei Chanukah Tamna. There's no hesped and there's no tinus." That's how you begin the Gemara. You should say, it would seem logical to say, Chanukah is the time that they went in and they found that there was a pach shem and a nas and nes. And a byproduct of that is that there's no hesped and there's no tinus. But how do you begin the Gemara like that? Of course, Heinemann pointed out, there's hesped by Talmud Chacham. I'm just speaking in the argumentative sense of the Gemara. When you look at hesped and tinus, what's that all about? It's clear. The Gemara understood, we all understand, that hesped and tinus are tremendous opportunities for growth. That's how we grow as Yidden, by being introspective, through hesped, through tinus. So at the Gemara Chanukah, there's no hesped and tinus. That means there's something so integral to Chanukah, something so basic to what Chanukah is about, that we can't allow hesped and tinus. It's in the Yitzum L'Shoyim. The Gemara doesn't have to say Chanukah is a time of simcha. It's in the Yitzum L'Shoyim. The whole essence of the day cries out that there's no hesped and there's no tinus. It's like the Rambam, Chanukah, that's because Chanukah is a time of simcha. The statement itself that there is no hesped and tinus means it's a time of simcha, that you can't have hesped and tinus. But you have to understand, how is that possible? If hesped and tinus are so integral to our growth, Chazal are going to be mevatel the opportunity for us to grow on Chanukah? Elamai, have to say that the opportunity to grow in Chanukah mitoich simcha, like the Rambam says, is just as great as the opportunity that we have from hesped and tinus. There's no drop off. They didn't say for 8 days you're not growing as b'nei Torah, but for those times you're growing mitoich simcha. The simcha, the nace of the pach shemen, and as was said before, the Torah Sheba'al Peh being preserved, really the nace of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the celebration of Torah Sheba'al Peh, that's what Chanukah is all about. That's what we grow from. And I would say, fittingly, my father's patira on Chanukah gives us an appropriate chance to truly celebrate Torah Sheba'al Peh. His happiness was his learning, his shiurim, his chavrusas, his face shone from the Orat Torah. As was said before, he was a Talmud Muvak of the Rosh Yeshiva. And I sensed that the Rosh Yeshiva, as my father went through life, the Rosh Yeshiva, so to speak, continued on through my father, through his asmada, his chedushim. Normally the yeshiva doesn't let someone who from the, not Leolenu in the yeshiva family, to have a hesped here. But I think in my father's case, as my brother David explained to me, It's not really an exception, because the Rosh Yeshiva understood that setting up a yeshiva where you're going to have many Bachrim after a while going to act in the community as Balabatim, and to see a Talmud like my father grow to that level, he was what the yeshiva was all about, the Hasmada, the quintessential Talmud of the Rosh Yeshiva. I don't really think he was an outsider to the yeshiva. He was very much in the inside. A friend of mine said to me yesterday when I was talking about the hesped here, he said, the only kasha would have been if the yeshiva said there shouldn't be a hesped here. He said, your father went around town. That's where Ner Yisrael went. He went around town. He stood for Ner Yisrael. He stood for the Rosh Yeshiva. We thank the yeshiva, my family, my mother, my entire family, for the opportunity to have the hesped here. But what was it about my father that made his Torah so special? For sure, he kept learning. But his Avos HaTorah was something that the Rosh Yeshiva implanted in him, and he took with him wherever he went. That Avos HaTorah meant that he wasn't just Leveya itim. You talk to people nowadays, and the guy says, I'm learning between 7 and 8, between 9 and 10. And that's very nice. But that's not what he understood. He understood that even though he had left the yeshiva in 1960 and he was out of the yeshiva for now it would have been 53 years, he really never left the yeshiva. He was always steiging. He showed that a balabas could accomplish in Torah. You didn't just learn what you did when you're in the yeshiva and then you leave and you kind of plateau and you hold on, you learn an hour here or there, you kaveit him an hour a day, but he steiged and he grew and he set the tone for balabas being able to say, I left the yeshiva in 1960. In 2013, I was still growing. I was still growing in my steiging and learning. He would call me up sometimes. He says, I have to speak somewhere, and I can't think of something new to say. It bothered him. He wanted to be mechadish in Torah. He was 80 years old at the time. He was 83 when he was nifter. It bothered him. He needs to be mechadish. Shiva gave over to the Bachram to be mechadish constantly. He had to be mechadish no matter how old he was. One of my earliest memories of my life was going with him to various shuls at different times. It's hard to remember exactly. At 4 or 5 years old, he would go in the mornings to Adas sometimes or to Hertzberg's and learn with different chavrusas, Alvin Gerstein, Zozayin Gesund, and others for years. And now we see a lot of balabatim. Baruch Hashem, it's wonderful learning. But really, again, and I was so young, I don't recall, but I don't think there were a lot of people once they left the yeshiva who were really vaxing us and learning every day. I recall that it was pretty empty in the Beis Medrash at the time. There were some guys and they were doing Yanka for Mishnah, but he was sitting and growing and steiging every day in 1960. It seems to me that he helped to blaze a trail, in at least in the city of Baltimore, if not for other places as well. And people saw what a balabas can accomplish and wanted to emulate that. This is the simcha of Chanukah. This is the simcha of Torah Sheba'al Peh. As a father, his message to me often was, when you learn Gemara, you understand. This is how the Rabbeinu Shalom is thinking. This is the Rabbeinu Shalom's thought process. Talk about inspiring your children to get in touch with Torah Sheba'al Peh. This is how the Rabbeinu Shalom thinks. That was his message to us. That is the Messiah from the Rosh Yeshiva. A message to all of us, really. We want to grow in learning. We have to attach ourselves to our Rosh Yeshiva. you can't just go buy a book or go online. It's the Messiah, as we all know. That's what counts. That's what drove him. That's what he constantly saw and wanted to give over. He loved the Rosh Yeshiva like a father. I'll tell you, there's a story. One of my sons asked me, he said, we put on tefillin in Chol Hamoed. So he says, what's our minig? What's our family minig? I said, well, Zaidi says that he asked Rosh Yeshiva. And the Rosh Yeshiva says that the Goyim Paskin, if you go to work, you put on tefillin. So he said to me, my son said, well, what's our family minig though, Dad? What's our family minig? So I said, Zaidi asked Rosh Yeshiva, and this is the psak. But that's not what I should have said. Our family minig is that the Rosh Yeshiva is our family. And that's why we follow what he says, because that is our family minig. It takes a great woman to share the same commitment for Torah that my father had. My mother's so gesund as that woman, although she's extremely modest about it. And yesterday I was telling her what an outstanding life partner and commitment she made to Torah, to Avos HaTorah, my father's learning day in, day out for all their 56 years of being married. And she said to me, I don't think I had much choice. She said, he's sitting and learning with a sefer and writing Chedushim day in, day out for 56 years. I had to go along with it. Mom, I think you're being very modest. I think you did a lot more than just go along with it. I want to close with this thought. A true simcha of Torah Shebaal Peh. My father never slowed down. You think about it. He was 83 years old. He was teaching, he was learning, he was running the senior kollel, he was taking care of my mother. The word retirement didn't cross his lips, other than when he spoke to a potential retiree about learning in the senior kollel. But otherwise, he never spoke, he never thought about retirement. In fact, about 2 weeks ago, he said, Meir, what's going to happen in about 10 or 15 years? I could see I might not have the same koiches then. There was no such thing as retirement. What's he going to retire from? To do what? What's retirement? Retirement, he's living a life which Rosh Yeshiva taught him, a simcha of Torah, Torah Shebaal Peh, to be alive, to be mechadesh. I'm happy. I've been wrestling with this for the last 24 hours. But I'm happy that he wasn't sick. He was just nifter. He was nifter with all of his koyach. He was telling over Torah Friday when I talked to him, Matzai Shabbos, he had things to say. My cousin were visiting, he was speaking in Torah right before he went to sleep on his last night in this world. That's how the Rosh Yeshiva wanted his Talmidim to live. You didn't get old and then get weak. You kept waxing ice and growing with all your koiches. That's the simcha of Torah Shebaal Peh. That's the true simcha of Chanukah. And I'm sure, as appropriate as it is, that way that he lived his life will definitely bring him a lichta Gan Eden. I just want, on behalf of myself and my family, to ask him mechila and ask that he should be a meilitz yosher for our family, for Klal Yisrael, and particularly for all the balabatim who want to steig and grow in their Torah and your Shemayim and their things that come up in life. Dad, be a meilitz yosher for all of them.